and welcome to Literary Prospects, where we talk to authors and other literary professionals about books, publishing, and the writing life. I'm Kelley Vick, the host of the program, and it's my pleasure to introduce today's guest, author Fran Hawthorne. Fran Hawthorne spent 3 decades writing award-winning nonfiction, including 8 books. She's been an editor and writer at Businessweek, Fortune, The New York Times, and Newsday, and she reviews fiction for the New York Journal of Books. Her debut novel, The Heirs, was published in 2018. The recently released I Meant to Tell You is her second novel. Fran Hawthorne, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today, and congratulations on your latest novel, I Meant to Tell You. I usually like to start out by reading some praise for the books that we're discussing, so I'll go ahead and do that now. Jennifer Colburn, USA Today bestselling author of Cradles of the Reich, says Fran Hawthorne delivers a nuanced exploration of the connections among women and how they can unravel when lies of omission are revealed. Told through the eyes of 3 women in different eras, I Meant to Tell You kept me turning pages late into the night. Yona Zeldas McDonough, fiction editor for Lilith magazine, says Fran Hawthorne has written a wise, kind, and above all, compassionate novel about the secrets we keep and the judgments we make. Her insights into the human heart and mind are both original and illuminating. This is a big-hearted book that is sure to warm yours. Brian Castleberry, author of 9 Shiny Objects, which was longlisted for the PEN/Faulkner Award for Fiction, says, I Meant to Tell You opens with a white lie, a small dishonesty, but it widens to reveal that the people we think we know may all be hiding behind convenient mistruths. In that way, it is a compelling portrait of our times, stuffed with richly drawn characters and alive with sharp and glimmering prose, a literary page-turner about how our pasts always catch up with us. And one more, Jana Steinberg, winner of the San Diego Book Award for her novel, The Tin Horse, says, an absorbing, beautifully told story about how tenaciously we hang on to family myths and how once one secret is revealed, other truths come into the light. So with all of that, let's jump into the conversation. And for those who were not privy to an advanced copy, what can you tell us about the book, Fran, about the story?
Well, first I have to thank you and then sort of feel like saying, after all that praise, I feel like I shouldn't say anything else. Won't make anything worse. But I will talk anyway, because you're nice enough to have me on. So secrets are indeed one of the themes of the book. It begins, and I'm not giving away too much, I'm just going to tell a little of the prologue in chapter 1. It begins when Miranda is taking her best friend Ronit to the airport so that Ronit can kidnap her own daughter. And they are arrested. So 7 years later, Miranda is engaged to Russ, who is a U.S. Attorney, a government prosecutor in Washington, D.C. And they both have these, idealistic visions. Miranda's grandfather was a union organizer. Her parents were leaders of the anti-Vietnam War movement in the 60s. She feels she has this, family heritage to live up to, and she, feels like there's no great cause that she can find to be involved in, and she and Russ sort of share this admiration for her family, this desire to, be do-gooders in the world. And then, as part of the FBI security vetting for his job, Russ learns that she had actually been arrested for kidnapping 7 years ago and had never told him. So that's the setup. And the repercussions from this discovery and this arrest that she thought she could put behind her don't just affect their engagement. They unscroll further and further to reveal a number of secrets in Russ's history, in Miranda's family history, and in Ronit's story as well. Mm-hmm. That's the friend who was kidnapping her child. And I also wanted to mention the sort of idealism of Russ and Miranda, because that is that's one of two other sub themes in the book, which is, okay, well, you could say, if you say one theme is we all keep secrets. I don't think there's a person on this planet who knows everything about me or any of your readers, right?
Right.
Maybe if you put all of our friends together, they probably still wouldn't know everything about each of us. So their secrets are necessary for life, but at what point, how far do you go before secrets become potentially dangerous, become wrong? And by the same token, how far should you go to help a friend? But so if you want to say that's one of the themes, then another theme though is, do we have a responsibility to do something to make the world a better place? Miranda and Russ feel that they do, and that's one of the things that brought them together. And that's what Miranda has always believed her family did. And then a third sub-theme has to do with Ronit and her reason for kidnapping to begin with. And that's got to do with the strain of being an immigrant. And I'm not saying that all immigrants kidnap, my God, no. And I'm certainly not saying that being an immigrant justifies kidnapping. But my point is the strain of her marriage to an American, the clashes that came about, and her daughter being kind of caught in the middle. So that's enough of a mouthful to begin with.
Well, what drew you to this story and these themes?
A totally roundabout method. I did not start out with immigration or changing the world as themes, but I did begin with the theme of family secrets. This actually, well, I have to ratchet back even further. So I have a lot of cousins, and I started becoming amazed when we would get together and we would share family stories, and we had different versions, completely the opposite. It was Aunt so-and-so did this. No, it was Aunt so-and-so. No, she was not. She didn't get married. Totally different stories. And I was just fascinated about how the stories get changed in the telling over the years. So I decided to write a 4-generation family saga that would be in reverse chronological order. It would start now and go back, so that as you went back in time, you would learn that some of the assumptions of the current generation, Grandpa was a war hero in World War I. Well, no, actually, Grandpa was a baby. I don't know, in the war. Some of these stories get changed. So I started writing, and I mapped it out in great detail. And I started with the youngest generation, and then the next, and it was just overwhelming. It was too big. I already had so many details and side stories that I wanted to include in the first generation, and to not include them seemed to be skimping, and to include them would make this, War and Peace just far too big. So I just said, you know what, I'm going to cut this in half, and I'm just going to do the 2 modern generations, which is what I did, Miranda and her parents. But one thing that was, I thought, wonderful for me that I hadn't had in my prior novel, because I had mapped out the earlier generations in such detail and outlined the book and drafted some of those chapters, I knew so much about where Miranda came from, about her grandparents and great-grandparents, that not only was I able to make her a fuller person, but the book contains references and hints about the prior generations. So they talk about her grandparents, for example. And so I think that, it really, it almost became a 3-generation book, not quite. And I don't know.
Was it difficult to figure out where to sort of cut that off? Like how much of the hint is enough when you have all of this in your head? It must be difficult to figure out where that line is, what gets in and what stays out.
Yeah. I mean, it's an even bigger version of the version that most writers have, fiction or nonfiction. You know much more than you put in the pages. And that's what enables you to write You're
Mhm.
not desperately grabbing for things, but you do have too much. But this is an exaggerated version of that because there were, you know, two whole generations I was mostly lopping out. Um, yeah, but it turned out that it wasn't that big a problem because so much of it naturally came in. After all, if Miranda is talking with Russ about her grandfather, and she said, you know, I always got a sense that my grandmother didn't agree with him. I don't know. When I was living with them as a little girl, because she did,
Mhm.
you know, and Grandpa would be saying, let's go out for this walk, and Grandma wouldn't say anything. And so it fit naturally in sometimes.
Mhm.
And at one point, Miranda imagines if Russ were having a conversation with her father, who was dead, who died when she was a baby, or a
Mhm.
conversation with her grandfather, and they're discussing their theories of saving the world. So I was able to keep a lot. And then because I simply made the cut, I said
Mhm.
two generations and that's it. There were things from Miranda's mother, Judith's childhood, that I had written that didn't get in. I mean, that's true. I it's more Miranda's story than her mother's. So, you know, I definitely left a lot out, but it wasn't as painful as leaving out entire, like with any fiction writer, you've written entire scenes and chapters and subplots that you then cut out. Oh, I mean, that's harder because I worked harder on those, on the language of those scenes.
Do you consider yourself I mean, you must be a bit of a vicious reviser.
I guess you have to be. I mean, I am a serial reviser, addicted reviser. I mean, this book had, I don't know, 9 versions, you know. The one I'm working on now, I don't even want to confess I'm on the 17th version. This is going to be it. This is going to be it.
I think that's a wonderful confession because it's, you know, when people are having problems with the first draft and thinking, oh, it's got to be like, this has got to be it. And then, you know, but you actually start talking to people who are published and have been doing this for a long time. And they're like, no, no, no. I mean, you know, it's 20 revisions.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, my favorite draft is the second draft. Okay. I mean, everyone admits the first is the hardest. You've got the blank screen. Okay.
Mhm.
And what you think is the last is second hardest because it's got to be perfect. Now, it often isn't the last because you turn it into, you submit it to editors, you turn it into an agent, they throw it back at you. But the second draft, I certainly know, is not the final one, but at least I have something to revise. Second, third drafts, I love them, you know.
Then you can kind of sink in and have a little fun.
Yeah, you know, I knew I was going to change this and finally I have the chance to change it. And my second draft is almost always my fact checking draft. In other words, I just write the first one, but I note copious notes of the places where I need to check the facts. So the second draft, I'm incorporating all the
Mhm.
corrections of fact, which in the process of which I will be changing the writing, but I'm not focusing all that much on the writing.
Mhm.
You know, and then the third draft is where I get to really zoom in on the writing.
So for this book, I meant to tell you, you are mainly, well, Miranda, our main character for much of it is in, we're in the 90s. What made you decide to go with the 90s versus now?
It's actually, there are three main periods in the book.
Mhm.
There's like 68 to 73, parents era.
Mhm.
There's the 90s kidnapping era. And then there's the specifically December 2002 till February 2003,
Mhm.
sort of the current era. And to be honest, it was dictated to begin, well, don't forget it began with 1900, but okay, it was dictated by the parents. They had to be, you know, college age in certain years in order to be participating in certain things. I mean, they were there at the student takeover at Columbia University. They were there at the huge protests at the Democratic Convention in 1968. I mean, there's a limited age range they could have been to have this happen. So once you do that, and once I knew the story of how Miranda was going to be born, and to have a protagonist who is engaged and still somewhat naive enough to be idealistic. I hate to say that, but I don't want to, people to think that I'm a total jerk. And also, I mean, she is experienced enough, she and Russ, to be somewhat established in their careers, but still isn't young enough not to not to know better in some way. Not just about idealism, about secrets, maybe, although maybe we're never old enough to know better. So anyway, she had to be within a certain range, somewhere between, let's say, 25 and 35. So once you add that to her parents' age that they had to be, you kind of end up around where I ended up, which is the 90s, when she's in college helping her friend kidnap. That's really being young and naive. And her friend Ronita's is a few years older than she is. And then in 2003, I mean, it could have been 2001. Well, 2001 has too many major implications. 9/11. I did not, this is not a 9/11 book. 2003 had some major protests against the Iraq War, which turned out to be perfect for me, because there she is saying, well, I can be like mom and dad. And no, I can't. This is not nearly as big as what they did. So it had a number of convenient political issues. There's her job involving certain things having to do with healthcare was a major issue then that I covered as a reporter, so I was able to draw on my experience. So anyway, that it kind of, I didn't choose the era. This is my my short answer
shows you. And that must have posed some particular challenges, though. I mean, it's a little research heavy. I was talking with another author recently about how, where do you draw the line when you call something actually like historical fiction? And when you're sort of going back to the 90s, I mean, you're back almost 20 years. And in some parts of that, we're sort of course, not when we're in the 2003, but you start to get back almost like before internet, the phones aren't the same. And, it's a whole other ballgame. So how did you approach all that?
Yeah, I mean, right. You're not just researching one era.
Yeah.
And I have to see the laptop problem. Okay. Someone's going to catch me on this, but I recall from my research, in 2003, laptops existed, but desktops were still dominant. And which meant that most people would not probably have a computer at home. They wouldn't have a laptop, and then probably, it depended. As a journalist, I did, but that was, I was freelancing by then anyway. So that was very different. So I had to deal with the issue of how is she going to be doing certain things at home on her laptop when she is not meant to be particularly technologically, she's not a pioneer. And cell phones, that was another thing. And that worked out fine. Everyone had cell phones, and smartphones, it didn't really exist yet. So there was, that worked out fine. That they texting and calling each other, and they're not, emailing on their phones. That was, I mean, there were Blackberries then, but they weren't, they weren't widespread. And I'm sure, gosh, somebody's gonna say, but I'm pretty sure the iPhone wasn't there yet. I did all this research and it's just gone out of my head. But as a journalist,
it gets in this sort of murky. As I was asking the question, I thought, wait, well, what did we have then, and what didn't we? And
as a journalist, I really did my research, and the book is correct, even if my mind has just become totally set. But I'm pretty sure, and I'm just remembering, my son's friend got an iPhone. I'm pretty sure of this now. Oh, no. Anyway, it was a few years after 2003, and he was a pioneer. So, anyway, so yeah, you talk about research. So I did have to do, research into 3 different eras and many topics: the laws on international kidnapping, the kind of cases a U.S. attorney would handle, life as a law student. I am not a lawyer, never have been. The things, though, I think most novelists have something in each of their novels that is something that they didn't do. There's always some research. And I have to tell you one, I don't have to tell you, but I'm going to tell you one thing that was wonderful for me when I was researching the riots at student takeover at Columbia. And I found a little flyer. I mean, not a physical copy, but online, a flyer that was handed out urging people to come to a demonstration. And I took the exact wording of that to use in my novel. And as a journalist, I love that, being able to say, this is actually accurate.
You have very richly drawn characters in the novel, and I'm wondering, do you base your characters on people that you know, or are they completely formed in your head? How does it start? I know they probably evolve, obviously, over time as you're writing, but when you're first dealing with these characters, do you ever base them on people in your regular life, or are they completely new?
They become who they have to be. They are never based on anyone, although the names often are. No, you start mapping out. Well, okay, everyone does it differently. I tend to start with the plot and what kind of person would do this. And the plot has actors from the very moment you create it. How do you have a plot without people? But I don't. Some writers start with the person. They start with a vision of a person sitting in a chair, a vision of a woman in a yellow dress. Then you start outlining and writing your characters. And then for me, then the character does take over. I have said I need a friend. Miranda has to have this friend, and this friend is, going to. I'm not even talking about. Well, we'll say Ronit. And she's, unhappy in her marriage, and she's going to be an immigrant. There's going to be a culture clash. But why did she immigrate? And then it just starts. She just starts developing and becoming herself. I don't guide them. I'm thinking about this. There will come times when I say, wait a sec. There does have to be a reason she does this action, or she's going to have to choose which action. And then I start taking charge. But those are niche examples.
That's interesting to me. And with this, so you're thinking in lines of plot forward, plot first. And this is an intricate plot in this book. It's very involved. Does it sort of are you working it out bit by bit, like a flash of plot and a flash of plot? Or is there some sort of, does it come to you, as some writers say, it comes to me sort of as a fully formed story, and then I'm fleshing out all of the middle, or like the beginning and the end comes to me, and then some people go bit by bit by bit. How did that work for you?
I do have a detailed outline. I can't write. Having said that, the final book ends up maybe a third according to the beginning outline. So I have a grand outline. I don't always know exactly where I'm going to end, but I know vaguely where I'm going to end. And one of the beginning points, like this book, well, because it began as the 4-generation saga, but it didn't begin where it begins now. It didn't begin kidnapping at the airport. But I do know a sort of beginning point. I mean, where it begins was a place, I think it was chapter 2 or something. It was, anyway. So how I get from the more or less beginning to the more or less end, I map out a basic route, and I map out some of the side routes that are going to happen to explain this character, to explain how they're going to get to the end, because there's several characters and they're each going to take a different route. And then, yes, I'm sure every writer tells you, you start to write and it goes its own way. Can I? Oh, I just wanted to go back if I can. I realized
Yeah,
kind of missed the main point if you're talking about research in some ways. Um,
sure.
I don't know if you're going to cut and splice or what, but I do. I mean, as a former reporter, I really do, research, online, looking for the facts. But I also, what's really important to me is as much as possible to physically go to the places that I'm describing. And I mean, this book takes place entirely on the East Coast, and I live in New York. So I was able to go down to Washington and Maryland, and I was able to go, to Ellis Island, and I was able to go up to Columbia, so that it was made it a little bit easier. But I really do. I mean, I rode the subway, took the metro in Washington, and took notes of what the announcements say, and I laugh. I say I went to Ellis Island, not to look up my ancestors, because I already did that, but to describe the floor and the window. The only person who goes
Mhm.
to Ellis Island for the floors. And so, um, if my characters are going to be walking across Memorial Bridge in Washington, across the Potomac, and stop at a bench and have a fight, I have to know what that bench looks like. And I have to
Mhm.
know what they're looking out at on the bridge. So that's really important to me. And I'm sorry I didn't think of it earlier.
Oh, no, I'm glad that you got it in now.
Yeah.
Um, how important is it for you to work within a community of writers? Do you work within a community?
In different ways, and it's crucial.
And
I mean, I can't trust myself. you know, um, I have. I mean, I'll give you one example. I have done writing classes, workshop classes.
Mhm,
I have done ad hoc workshops with some other writers, and I got together.
mhm,
I have hired outside editors to read over my drafts. Done that all. And so there was one writing class that I was in workshop, and I was reading, or had given a version that's pretty close to the current prologue.
mhm,
And they said, one student said, "Why does Miranda keep turning around and looking behind her? Does she think the police are following her?" No, no, I didn't intend that at all. I was a sign of what a lousy driver, and she keeps cutting in lanes. And so I thought, wow, that's the kind of thing I would never have caught by
mhm,
myself. And I'm not saying it's a big thing. On the other hand, it's the prologue. And if it's going to lead to people mistakenly thinking she knows she's kidnapping and she expects to be found,
mhm,
that's not an interpretation I want. So, from the little to the big, you absolutely need a writer's in a practical way. And then as well, there's the kinship, right?
mhm.
The just talking about the depression and despair and frustration and whatever, or the practical advice. Do all these things that you probably ask,
Mhm,
your guests, do you have a set schedule every day? Gosh, I mean, you need just, you need friends in life.
mhm.
Like if you work in an office, hopefully you have colleagues. So moms groups, I've been in moms groups as a mom. Yeah, I think we all need that.
How do you find your particular
Yeah.
community?
Well, I was lucky with the first one. I have a good friend who was going for MFA, and I think at that point, for my first novel, I'm saying she may
Mhm,
have published her memoir already. So she had moved from New York down to Virginia, but she connected me with some of her New York writer friends. So that way, I kind of started out with a group of other writers. There were 5 of us, all writing fiction. Um, and then I did take a class. I've taken a few, 3 classes, I think,
mhm,
uh, with various institutions, and not at colleges, but just 92nd Street Y or Gotham
mhm,
Writers, these
mhm,
organizations here. And in some cases, in one case, just one fellow student and I stayed together and kept meeting with each other. In another case, about 5 of us from the class continued on our own. So all kinds of different ways. But I'd say if you live, in a place, a small town, where it's hard to find other writers, hopefully you're near enough to a city that has some kind of writing group, and even if it means an hour drive or something, if you can do it, start that way and then make your friends. And of course, I suppose nowadays, you can do it on Zoom. I have never done a Zoom writers group. I mean, mine all began before COVID. And then they kind of, I guess fell apart. And I know people do that, and I would be so interested in their experiences, especially if they've done both versions, in person and Zoom, and whether they think, it can work in Zoom. I have my book clubs all converted to Zoom. That's very different though. So
I've done it both, but a lot on Zoom, obviously, and it has worked well. It's a different feel,
yeah.
but if that's what you can do, then you do what you can.
Yes. Oh yeah. I mean,
Zoom.
absolutely. Of course it matters. Obviously, the other people in your group, and I'm sure your other guests say the same thing, have to first, you have to kind of get along. And it's, even if you didn't know them beforehand or not, you have to trust each other. You have to know that they'll be honest, but they'll be honest in a considerate and sensitive way, and that they trust you so that you won't cry. I mean, you can take it, or you won't cry in front of them, that they can feel comfortable critiquing you. And you have to have certain shared writing values. I think my groups, I always go with fiction, mainstream fiction. But sometimes in the classes that I've taken, there've been people writing children's books or thrillers or something. So and I think it's great that it opens my mind, and I get the view of somebody who is in a totally different lane reading my books. I think that's nice, but I'm not sure as an ongoing small group. Again, I would be so interested to hear from other people. I don't want to be, too close-minded here.
You have published, this is your second published novel, and you've also published quite a few nonfiction books. What was the road to publication like for you?
Tough. Writing having published nonfiction, having won awards for my nonfiction books meant almost nothing. It's totally different style. My agent didn't handle fiction, so I didn't even have that advantage to begin with. And the publishers of my last two nonfiction books didn't publish fiction. I mean, really, it was the only thing that helped. I kind of understood the process of writing and revising a complete novel, and the publishing process, and how galleys worked, and all of that. I just like everybody else, I wrote. I mean, we all have very different processes.
Well, you wrote. You've got the last draft. You're ready to go of your first novel on your computer. And what then? Take me through.
Yeah. Well, okay. I did. My agent didn't handle fiction, but she said, well, you know what, Fran, if you want to try it, I'll try it. In a way that's not good. You probably shouldn't have two brand new novices going. So so if you're lucky enough to have an agent, you give it to your agent, who then, if you're lucky, as I was, she sends it back with a really good critique. So, but then, she didn't have, and I didn't have the contacts in the publishing world. And so, it's hard to get editors to read, people that they don't know. So it was a tough beginning, and she sent it out to the big houses and it didn't get accepted. So then I hired an outside editor to read it over, who pointed out to me, well, Fran, you don't have a plot. And I said, yes, I do. And she said, that's the setup. You don't have conflict. Oh, so no wonder it didn't get accepted. This is not the current novel. This is the first one. So I revised it. And then I went out and sent it out to small presses, having already tried a version of it with a big house. what I was told was that the big houses won't see, if a respectable agent has sent it to big houses, and it's been turned down, they won't see it. I don't want to spread rumors that aren't true. I just said, so I said it's what I was told.
Mhm.
So I just sent it out to the small presses. Just the same way, you go online, you get the books, you look them up, you look at the ones that seem to be, if you have friends who have published, you ask them to recommend you. This one was just cold. I didn't know anybody. And in fact, this was a small press. They asked you to send in, I think, 50 pages printed and mail it in. Things online. Fine. I'll go and pay to have it printed and put it. And then I go to the post office and the clerk says, "You got the wrong zip code." And I said, "Oh, wait a minute. Yeah, this is what it's on the website. I double checked." And the clerk says, "Well, we put it on the scale. It comes up a different zip code. Just go with my zip code." I mean, I was so sure it was going to be returned to me, address on file. And instead I get the email saying, "We really like it." I've almost fainted. I've never fainted in my life, but I think I was going to faint. It'd be that, and everything was wrong except it wasn't.
And then was it different? I meant to tell you, was that a different experience? Again, I'm sure since you're already published.
Well, it's, in some ways I have, hate to disappoint you people. It's almost worse if you published a novel that wasn't a big bestseller, win prizes, get, noticed. Because if it's your first novel, there's a way in which, you're fresh. There's, unknown. You could strike gold.
Mhm.
Now I'm someone who has a reputation of nice novel, but doesn't sell big,
Mhm.
and that's harder in a way to market yourself. So I guess, gosh, if your first one better be wonderful. I'm sorry, I really don't want to be a jerk because, and
No,
of course,
not at
I did sell
all.
this one, and I know
You did.
many people who have not been bestsellers. Most of my writing friends have not been bestsellers, and they have sold more than one novel or more than one book of, whether it's short stories and poetry, and sometimes they switch publishers, and they have several publishers. Sometimes they switch agents if they have an agent. So, uh, I don't really want to discourage anybody. I just want to I don't want to raise false hopes.
It's a
Having that
reality of the
novel,
situation. And yeah.
it's not a golden ticket, but you know what? It is honestly the difference for me personally between night and day. It may not be the difference to those editors out there, but
Mhm.
for me, knowing that there was a publisher out there that liked my first book
Mhm.
so much that publisher was willing to put its money and its name behind me.
Mhm.
That just made all the difference. And that I actually held, I should walk over and get it, held that book in my hands,
Yeah.
my name's on. So that's huge. And, so, and now that happened again, publisher willing to put
Mhm.
name and money behind it and publish it. And I'm just, thrilled. And sure, would I like to have a bestseller? Yeah, of course. I mean, I have a friend who's published, a dozen novels and gotten nice reviews. And, no bestsellers yet. He's
Yet.
well read. Yeah. And would I like to win a big award? Sure. Would I, I mean,
Mhm.
you know, I think I don't want to pretend I write because that's what I do, because I've been writing my whole life. That's what I have to do. But I'm also ambitious.
Yeah.
I write things that I want people to read, and I want people to think highly of what I've written.
I
So
think most writers
yeah.
do. What draws you to fiction?
Um, it is the story and the people. I guess that's why I start that way. I mean, I love a well-written book. I cringe at a poorly written book, even though I may turn the pages if it's compelling. So language does matter, but yeah, ultimately, or wait, you asked me to reading or writing it? Because if you meant writing it, well, it's because I love to read it.
Well,
And
both, I guess. I was thinking about writing it, but
yeah,
both.
yeah, I write novels. I don't write short stories. I don't write poetry, partly because if I'm going to go to all that trouble to create these full-fledged characters and this interesting plot, I get a whole book's worth out of it. I don't want to have to come up with 10 of those to fill the 300 pages, I don't have that much creativity. I don't. So I want the space to get into depth. Again, if I'm going to go to the trouble of creating a bunch of characters, I want to really get into them and have them do a lot of things and mess up a lot, and learn a lot. So that's why novel, yeah, fiction, because I mean, I spent a career writing nonfiction, so I certainly did it. And you could ask, why I did that, and I could answer. Still, but fiction is more fun, more creative. I don't know. I just I prefer reading it, like I said.
And speaking of reading, you also review books.
Yeah.
As well. What is that like when you're sort of taking off your writer hat and putting on your critic's hat? I mean, will you, if you get a book to review and you're just like, this is not for me, how harsh do you get? Or
Oh, okay. I'm glad you asked that, because I have learned my first book review. It's too harsh. And now I'm the other seat. But you do have to remember that the human being has written every book, but you also have to remember that human beings are reading your book reviews, and you can't mislead the readers. So it is a fine line. If it's, first of all, if it's a well-established person, bestseller, or let's say an actress who writes a novel, whatever, I will be as harsh as I need to be. They can handle it. They've got the fame, they've got the money. So that's the easy one. And then, by the way, if the book's good, I'll say so too. Yeah, if you've got a debut novel, or even the second, third, fourth of someone who's like me, right, not famous, I will be honest, but I will. First of all, always start with something good. There's always something good to start with. And let's say I think that I love the characters. They're really full-fledged. I don't buy the basic premise of the plot. And there are far too many cliches. I will start with I love the characters, but I don't buy the basic premise of the plot. I won't talk about the cliches. Okay. And I'm sorry, readers of my book reviews, if you think I'm but how much do you have to pound a person in the head? What's more important to the reader? And some people don't mind cliches anyway. I hate them. Okay. So, I am just a real stickler. Having said that, the most important thing to me is the characters and plot. Nevertheless, I am a stickler for writing and, trying to find new ways of saying things and not using the same word twice on the same page, other than, the, a, and, Anyway, so in writing my review, I'm saying the plot is the more important. So I'm not going to just bother about the cliches, and I will try to find a positive, sensitive, supportive way of saying the plot doesn't work, instead of saying, what a stupid premise, right? You can kind of say, it's hard to believe that a character who's been portrayed as so thoughtful would do something like this. So that's how I do it.
That makes sense. I always think about, authors often also do critique and write reviews, and I always think, oh, but what if you have to review your friend's book? And
well, I mean, you don't. I mean, there are some conflicts of interest you don't do. Yeah. So and I've told my friends that, and they understand. So yeah.
How did you get started writing? We've sort of danced around that a little bit and talked about that you've always written and you write because you have to. But how did all that start? Do you have an earliest memory with writing?
Yeah, it's one of the earliest memories of my life. And that is just like so many, authors, took a piece of paper, folded it in half to look like a book, with my pencil, squiggly, squiggly, and read it aloud. I mean, that's, I don't know, maybe half of the authors, maybe all authors do that. And maybe in not just authors. But so it's what I've always done. What I say is what makes me a little bit different is that I was serious. And in elementary school, I was writing novels, and I knew I was going to be a writer. And in junior high, I started trying to publish them. I sent one to a publisher who wrote back saying, please contact us again when you're old enough to sign a contract. And I had pretty sophisticated novels. When I was in elementary school, I had a novel about a family in the American Revolution that is torn, between one brother is a loyalist, one's with the rebels, the colonials, and colonists. I mean, most elementary school kids do not know this. They think that everybody living, in the 13 colonies was rebelling against the British, and somehow I knew this, that, there were divisions in families. Anyway, so I'd say, and to have that concept was pretty good for an 8-year-old, whatever I was. So, yeah, that's how I got into it, because that was me,
Do you still
Some
have
kids
them?
play
Do you have
baseball.
some of these novels that you wrote when you were? No.
I know. We moved around a lot when I was a kid. You know, I think it was 7 houses in 7 different cities in 3 states by the time I was
wow.
in 5th grade. Yeah, so things get lost in the move. Yeah, I know. I wish. So and so I knew I was going to be a writer, and but I just somehow knew that I wasn't going to earn a living that way. I knew I was going to have a career. I mean, that was made clear. My mother was a teacher, and my sister and I were going to go to college and have careers.
Mhm.
Yeah. And so I just figured I would be a teacher, an English teacher like my mother, English writing. And I did not want to be a teacher, and I would have been a terrible teacher. So it's a good thing I didn't become a teacher. But I just
Well, then
breathed.
you started working as a journalist and publishing nonfiction,
Right,
right, for
right.
quite some time.
But that was unintentional. While I was in college, one of my roommates said to me, well, Fran, if you like to write, why don't you try out for the school newspaper? And I was horrified. Newspapers, hack writing. I don't do this. I do art. But I went to the school newspaper. This was in California, the University of California at Berkeley. And the paper is the Daily Californian. And I walked in, they gave me an assignment about check cashing fees. In fact, the university was now charging students fees for, can't forget these things. And I did it, and I kind of had fun, and I did a good job, and they hired me. And that was it. I just wrote for the paper. I had a part-time sort of freelancing job. Right after college, I got hired by a chain of weeklies in Silicon Valley. And guess what? I could earn my living writing. Not writing novels, but I could earn my living writing. Oh. And I just got addicted.
Did you continue writing fiction on the side
Not
throughout?
enough. I did. I did. But and maybe you're not one of those, but many of us can come up with all kinds of excuses as to why we're not writing today.
Oh yeah. I'm familiar.
Yeah. I write all day. And for many people, with your first job, you don't work 9 to 5, right? You work 8 to 9, 8 a.m. to 9 p.m. Oh, I'm working all day. I'm tired, Yeah, and then I never stopped. There were many days when I didn't write fiction, but I never did. I go for a few months without writing fiction, but there's never been a year when I didn't write fiction. I'm quite confident to say that. So
what is your routine like now? I feel like we sort of talked about this as a cliched question earlier, but
No,
I
no,
do always like to ask people
no.
because it's interesting the variety of responses that
Yeah,
you get.
no, I'll bet. And no, I just said that's one of the things you can discuss with a
Mhm.
community. It's not a
Mhm.
cliche at all. It's just I cringe because I am not one of those with a routine. Um, in order to focus, to really focus on the writing, the book review, whatever, the creative thing, I have to clear my mind. And I'm not one of those who can just clear my mind by meditating. So that means I have to get the little junk out of the way. Well, first of all, okay, first thing every day is I run 8 miles. Okay, that is
Wow.
my vanity. Oh, you know, and I do a lot of thinking, and I come back with ideas for what I'm writing.
Mhm.
Um, and so okay, so the second thing I have to do is put those ideas into my draft or my outline. But after that, I have to check my emails and pay the bills and check, my social media. Because now with the book coming out, I'm trying to do something every day and do the little stuff out of the way, whatever. And then, do the laundry or get the laundry going. And then, by then it's time for breakfast. So then, and so I just, I don't, except for the brilliant ideas I had while I was running, I
Mhm.
really don't sit down to really write until 9, noon. I mean, there have been days, and it's kind of depressing actually, when I sit down and go, my God, it's noon already and I haven't written yet. Um, but then the good part is that when I do, I'm all there,
How long are you going? Like once you do sit down, then you can just run with it for the rest of the
it
day? Because
depends.
I think this sounds impressive. Like you're
No,
saying
well,
it
no,
sounds
no, no.
depressing, and I'm like, oh, this is.
Because and I'm not talking about not just the novels when I say, down be creative, but if I'm really stumped, um I mean, I can sit there and be stumped for 2 hours, and writing things and deleting and writing, deleting and checking my email and writing and deleting, and emerge with nothing, or I can just be stumped and then get so frustrated that I get up after an hour and fold the laundry or go for a walk or something. On the other times though, I mean, um, I can look up and it's 3 hours later and it's wonderful. And I just really need to go to the bathroom. Well, let's be honest here,
Yeah.
right? Uh, when it's good, it's good, right? And when it's bad,
But
it's
you won't get
fine.
the good times unless you're sitting at the chair, right?
Yeah, see,
So.
I make myself at the first draft
Mhm.
start from page 1 and go to the end. Even though, in my outline, I have detailed scenes and I want to get to them,
Mhm.
but I have to force myself to get through the boring chapter, the chapter I don't even know what's going to happen in that chapter. I have to force myself, in that first draft to do it. My
Mhm.
reward is the chapter I want to write. And usually the end I always want to write because you really know, what you want to say.
Mhm.
With the other drafts, I still, unless, like I said, I have an inspiration that's out of place, I still try to revise in the order that the reader, I think, is going to read it,
Mhm.
because I have to make sure I'm not jumping ahead of the reader, that I don't assume the reader knows something that the reader can't know because I haven't written it, that chapter,
Mhm.
yet, or I have written
Mhm.
the chapter, but it hasn't been put in the book yet.
Mhm.
But the drafting is not nearly as frustrating as the first draft. I mean, again, that's nothing new. Everybody knows that.
What is your favorite thing that you've read recently?
Wow. Hmm. And I'm sitting there saying, what is the book that I just read that is so amazing? And oh, yeah, okay. I just finished The Counter Life by Philip Roth. It's an oldie, and I'm in awe of it. And believe me, I don't always like Philip Roth. And the complexity of not just the plot, but the assumptions we start out as a reader, and how Roth just keeps turning us around and twisting and manipulating us, and in different locations also, but different, what you thought, I mean, I don't know if you've read this book, but
I haven't, and I'm going to put it on my list.
yeah, okay, just in chapter 1, the brother Henry is the one with the heart condition who goes for the operation and dies.
Mm-hmm.
But in chapter 2, it's, the other, he survives. And then, and you keep, I mean, I was just amazed. And it's not a game. I mean, what Roth is doing is really challenging our assumptions of who a writer is, of what a novel is, and so I'm just in awe. And it's not a very long book. It's about 300 pages. Anyway, so I'm so glad to be able to say I just read a really good one, because, that's not always the case.
That's why sometimes I ask, what are you reading right now? And what is your favorite thing you've read lately? Because oftentimes, people want to just pick one or the other.
Right now that I'm reserving judgment, about 1/3 through, I mean, again, it's amazing writing style, the way she gets into the character's head, and the way the jerkiness of the character's point of view, it's so true. And the questions the character dares to ask about feelings that some of us might have, and her honesty. Mm-hmm. However, I don't buy the that's kind of what I was saying earlier, the inciting action, and then the secondary side again. Why she left her family is too much of a cliche, and then why she didn't go back for the funeral, I don't buy it. Doesn't so that's why I'm holding off judgment, and I'm not even saying the title of it. I'm being somewhat critical, and I don't want to.
But I like that. I like the explanation of the critical point of view as well. I have got an eye on the clock, so I want to make sure that I get my usual last question in for you, which is if or when I meant to tell you is made into a movie or a TV series.
Your lips to God's ears. Yeah.
What would you pick for the theme song?
Oh, wow. Your timing is sort of perfect, because I've been talking to a couple of friends in the music world about making a playlist. And I'm thinking it has to be from the 60s to have the right inspiring mood. Although I was also sort of playing with, within the 60s. Okay. But I'm not going to take one of the, anthems of, civil rights or, protest movement. That's a little too strong. So I am torn between 2 songs by women. One is a more gentle version of the other. So I think I will go with oh boy. Should I go gentle or tough?
I don't know. Maybe give us both.
Oh, am I allowed? Okay.
Yeah, you can. Okay. Well, I mean, I'm so intrigued now by which is which.
Because a crucial turning point in the plot is when one woman, and I'm not going to say who, mm-hmm. makes a key decision about the man in her life. Mm-hmm. Okay. And so I'm thinking of either Different Drum by Linda Ronstadt, which is basically saying, I don't need you. Mm-hmm. These are both songs from the 60s. That's why I'm choosing them and not some other one. And Turn, the Judy Collins version. That's not specifically about a woman saying to a man, I don't need you. But what she is saying is, what Ecclesiastes is saying is, there was the season for us, mm-hmm. and now there isn't. So you see, mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. gentle and the tough one, but they're both from the 60s. So that I don't know.
I like them both.
Thank you.
Yeah. It's a nuanced approach.
Yeah. So, well, producers out there, honestly, I'll take whatever the movie producer wants. Fine with me. Yeah.
Well, if/when I make a literary prospects playlist with all of our suggested songs. I'll add them both.
Thank you. Thank you.
Fran, it's been a pleasure talking with you and having you on. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for inviting me. Thank you for liking my book. I meant to tell you. And good luck to you and all your other guests.
Thanks for joining us on Literary Prospects. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe and leave us a review. We'll see you next time.